Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hey, what's up? I'm dialing in remotely today.
I know, I can tell. You don't sound as crystal clear as you normally do.
Yeah, I know. I don't have the big Mondo rig with me. No, I'm on the road. I'm calling in from my in-laws' house right now in Texas, in Tejas.
Tejas, the country of Texas, as I understand it.
Yeah, the Republic of the Republic of Texas, as it was once known.
Yes.
That's why we can fly. I don't know if any other states do this. I've never bothered to look, but we can fly our flag, the state flag, even with the United States flag, because we were once a country before we were a state.
I did not pay attention to this, but do I see the Arizona flag with the U.S. flag? Probably not, huh?
Yeah, so normally the state flags are flown below the U.S. flag. Now, some people elect to still fly the Texas flag below the U.S. flag, but quite a few places around Texas, you'll notice, will fly the Texas flag at equal height with the U.S. flag.
It's the country of Texas.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I'm on the road here, and oh man, I am sore as fuck because I hadn't squatted for like a week and a half, and then I dipped into a local gym here to go squat, and they had these really shitty like CrossFit style bars, like Rogue Echo bars with no center knurling, and they're real whippy and stuff. So all I could really manage to keep on my back without it just completely sliding off my shirt was about 315. So I just did that for a bunch of triples. I couldn't even do like 5 reps because the bar would just slide around so bad. And now I'm super sore. But I think this is maybe a good time to talk about a little bit of programming.
Yeah.
So we were kicking around this idea of just talking a little bit more about what we've been doing in various iterations. Like me for the last, 12 months, and you for the last several years, which is like explaining like how our programming works in terms of like the main barbell lifts and how we've made progress doing what I think for a lot of people would seem like not very much work at all, right? And that's broadly what we would call like a rotating linear progression. That's what I would call it, at least. I don't know if you have a different name for it, but a rotating linear progression, training the big barbell lifts 1 day a week.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned this on the show a little bit before, but we wanted to go into more detail about like, how we actually program that and how we iterate that once it, stops working like everything does.
Well, I think we need to just start by talking about stress recovery adaptation. I always like to start with that because I don't really, when I first started lifting this way, I was very, very much into all the programming stuff. Like most novices tend to be, you want to sit there and analyze everything and complicate things because it's fun, right? More interesting,
right.
And I sucked it up and did the LP, but in the back of my mind, I wished it was more interesting, just like most other people. And I tried some things out once I started kind of doing my own thing because I'd hired a couple guys and did some more commercially available programs, I would say, or commercial methods. I'm trying to find
how diplomatic of you.
Right. Yeah. Just the popular silly bullshit of the time, DUP or RPE, or fatigue sets, rotating supplemental lifts, and
did you ever do the 5-3-1 stuff where it's like, oh, well, like 5-3-1 juggernaut with joker sets and...
No, I didn't go that far. I hired coaches. I never tried to apply any of that shit. It was just stuff that was prescribed to me. And I accidentally got stronger doing it. First guy I worked with, overtrained volume. Second guy I worked with, overtrained intensity. And when I went on my own, I went back to what I've been having everybody that hired me do, For some reason,
Right.
For some reason, I thought that hiring a coach with a competitive background was going to teach me something that, I wasn't already learning through reading the books, Baker's content, and training clients and watching my stuff work better on the people I was training than the things I was doing,
Yeah,
How ironic, right? And then people kept telling me, why don't you do your own? And then finally Rip got in my head. He's like, your advanced lifter can't do his own program. He ain't worth a shit as a coach or something like that, something to that effect, right?
Right, yeah.
You don't need somebody to do your shit. You need to get your back looked at periodically because we all fuck it up from time to time, which I agree with. But he's like, you should be able to handle your own programming. So basically it turned into, I called him once or twice a year, and I still do sometimes if I haven't had to in a while, but I used to call him like maybe once a year, have a quick conversation, then just put things to work. Because at the end of the day, and this leads into why I mentioned stress recovery adaptation, I just started looking at all of my programming through that lens. And, your, blank spot pick your guru will sit there and say that, oh, you're oversimplifying. Well, you know what? For most of us, it doesn't need to be that complicated. So,
Yeah.
when I first kind of went on my own, I'm like, all right, I'm going to do what I wanted to do for a long time. I'm going to rack pull 1 week. I'm going to pull from the floor 1 week. And I did that for a while, and my deadlift went up. I added 15 pounds to it. What would that be in like a 2-year span, 2.5 years? Yeah, so that's for a 500-pound deadlifter. That's not too bad,
Yeah.
So I hit 500 March of 2018, and December of 2020 I got 515. Honestly, though, I think I was stronger. I think I just one of those things. This is where I had a blind spot. I think that I was going into my peak still with too much stress, especially on the squat.
Oh yeah, right.
Because man, I squatted 410 for 5, and then my max was like 445, which flies in the face of years of data that I've gathered. Like if anything, that ratio should widen, not narrow, because it's getting heavier. But for me, it narrowed because I think I was just basically too many doubles and singles at heavy weight. My quads were tired. And I got 525 to the top of my thighs. I just couldn't lock it out that day. And I watched 515 the other day, and I'm like, when I pulled 500, it was a lot slower than 515. I'm like, I just think that I wasn't able to pull the stress back enough to express the full extent of my strength. I also deadlift. I have rack pulled 525 for 5 that training cycle and one other time. So right. Yeah. So something was off there in the way I was running up my singles and doubles, where my legs were just tired, But either way, I did that for a couple of years, and then it stopped working because I would get to about 515, 520, something. I think I hit 525 one more time on the rack pull, and then it would go to 0 reps. I go from 525 by 5 to 0, and this happened more than once. So I was like, okay, this approach isn't working because the rack pull is now as stressful or more stressful than the full range of motion deadlift. So I started, I'm like, okay, so what do we got here? We got stress. So I gotta treat them the same basically. The rack pull is now an intensity stressor, so I can't use it as an off week, shorter range of motion pull, So I got rid of that, then I just started ramping up every 3 weeks. So you see a theme here, right? So in the beginning, when you're a novice, you're deadlifting 3 times a week. You're adding weight every 48 hours for the most part. You get the weekends off. So, what is that, 72?
Yeah.
But, you're 48, every 48 hours during the week, and then you get a 72-hour break on the weekend. And then the deadlift goes to deadlift, power clean, or deadlift and some other deadlift variant. And you're now pulling every, 96 hours, Monday and Friday.
Yeah, right.
On 1 week, and then the next week you might only pull once. So eventually it goes to every week. Every week you're pulling heavier, right? Then it gets to a point where 5 goes to 0 because your squat earlier in the workout wears out your back. Now what? So, okay, well, I'm going to rack pull 1 week, and I'm going to do, halting or a deficit or, something else the next week, right? And now you're, adding weight to it every other week. Then from there, you're thinking, okay, well, that's gone to shit. Now what? Every 3 weeks. So now you're doing a heavy, light, medium over a 3 week span, right? And, you kind of keep taking this approach. Every 3 turns into every 4. Every 4 turns into every 6, et cetera. And, gets to a point where you're hitting a PR maybe once or twice a year, maybe once a year. And, if you're an Olympian, every 4 years, But the point is, my attempt at a limit set was always planned, right? I was planning the PR, whether it was a set of 8, a set of 5, or 1 RM. And, I think a lot of people don't think of it this way, and that's why this RPE shit's just gotten popular. Well, if something went to shit, you just use the RPE and make it lighter, right? And I'm sure I'll be accused of saying the same thing when I explain myself, and I really don't care. I'm not trying to do business with you. You're not going to buy anything, so I'm just going to continue on. Anyhow, if a lift goes to shit, it's going to be one of 2 things. Either too much stress, not enough recovery, right? And sometimes the second one is due to the first one. So it's could be an oxymoron, but sometimes not enough recovery means you're not eating or sleeping enough too.
Right. Yeah.
But in some cases it's not enough recovery because you've applied too much stress. You've done too much volume or you've tried to do too much intensity. So you've either done, 5 sets when you only needed 3, or you're trying to do 92% 3 days after doing 95%. That was prescribed to me at one point.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Like sometimes when you're talking about novices going into intermediates, in that early intermediate territory, I think you could have a situation where the stress is too low to continue driving adaptation. I think you can have that situation happen with upper body lifts, with the press and the bench press sometimes.
Yep.
But I would say beyond that point, when we're talking about a true intermediate, and especially as you get into advanced, I'd say it's 9 times out of 10, it's a too much stress problem. But you're right, that can also be a under recovery problem. It's important to diagnose what that is. But I will say that sometimes is true that there's not enough stress though.
Of course.
But probably not for the more advanced lifter.
Well, let's talk about that. Typically, when I see too much stress, it's often with the squat or the deadlift.
Yes.
When I see not enough stress, it's often with the bench press or the press, right? Although, as we talk tonight, I'm going to talk about my experience with too much stress on the bench press.
Right.
We'll get to that. I'm actually going through too much stress on my bicep curls. Laugh it up, you purists out there. I got golfer's elbow for the first time in my life, and it was from curls, which Rip would say it's why you don't need fucking curls.
Right.
But I'm still going to train my arms. But it ties into this.
But you do need guns, though.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll lead into that too, because it ties back into this conversation. I got golfer's elbow because too much fucking stress, and that you're going to run into that when you start training something new because you don't know where your limits are. I don't know where the hell my limits are on a bicep curl. I never trained it. Well, I'm finding out now. So it's dissipating, but damn, it fucking sucks. Anyhow, so most of the time, let's start with too much stress. The first place that I see too much stress with most people who are doing the novice linear progression, and for those of you who are new listening to us for the first or second time, that's the starting strength novice linear progression. You can Google it, but it's very heavy on the squat. So you're squatting 3 times a week and adding weight every single time. So you can add 15 pounds a week to your squat for quite some time. And the assumption, just like every program, every therapy, every drug has assumptions behind it. Anything you use has assumptions behind it. The assumption behind that program is that you've never lifted a weight before in your life, that you are eating at a caloric maintenance or surplus, depending on how heavy or not heavy you are. If you're light, you're eating at a surplus. If you're heavy, you might be at a small deficit. If you're kind of in between, you're at least at maintenance or a slight surplus, but you're eating enough calories to fuel this, right? This is a program that requires high calories. Right. So 15 pounds a week on a squat. Remember, assumption number 1, you are a novice. You've never lifted before. You could also be someone who's been doing it wrong and you're learning the movement for the first time, and now you're kind of like a novice, but you're not going to be on it as long as somebody who's a true novice, right? So I came in 315 squat, ended up doing that for 5 and then some, but I didn't add like 200 pounds to my 5 rep squat like a novice would. right? Like a true novice would.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Or somebody coming off a bed rest, that's another situation, or off of a layoff or been sick, you can, train like a novice if you've had time off. But a true novice, somebody who's never lifted, that's the person who's going to add 15 pounds to a squat weekly for several months. If somebody recovering from something, you cut that time in half or in thirds. So just for you newbies out there that are just hearing about this. Anyhow, yeah, it's not unusual to do that, by the way. So it's at 60 pounds in a month on a squat. Not unusual if you've never lifted weights before. We can listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have other episodes where we cover why that is. Anyhow, there's this thing that I've seen with starting strength, and I don't know that I fell victim to it, but I know that the people I was around when I was running the novice linear progression all fell into this, I don't know if addiction or obsession is the right word, but they were just very fixated on wanting to add 5 pounds to the squat forever, in perpetuity. Like they want to squat infinity plus 1 for three sets of 5. And then they want to squat infinity plus 2 48 hours later for 3 sets of 5. And I still see it now with the diehard starting strength guys that hire me, They'll be very much fixated on squat heavier at all costs. The most extreme example I saw was another coach. I don't know if I think he let his credential lapse years ago. He owned a CrossFit box and he got into podcasting and just wasn't really coaching in person anymore. But he got his squat up to like 455 for 3 sets of 5, something like that. Squatting 3 times a week, adding 5 pounds per workout. And he just cut all the other lifts out to the point where he was just squatting 3 sets of 5. It was taking him 2 hours to work out to do those 3 sets. And that's all he did, And
that's kind of amazing. I admire that commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he had a weightlifting and CrossFit background, so it doesn't entirely surprise me that, he did that because, weightlifters love to squat. And at the same time that I was talking to him, I met another guy that Horn trained who was a semi-pro tennis player who was too injured for tennis but can strength train, right? I don't know. I forgot what his injury was, but he was clearly able to strength train because he did the same thing. He got his squat into the mid 400s, and he gained weight, and he just started letting everything else, all the other lifts, fall by the wayside. Like his deadlift was his squat was 435 for 3 sets of 5, and his deadlift was 380 because his back was fried. His press was 150, not even. No, his press was 125. His press was not impressive, and his bench was under 200, I think.
Wow.
but he kept adding to the squat, so it was how do I even put this? It was a compulsive squatting disorder.
Is that in the DSM?
It's in the DSM-6. That hasn't been released yet, but that's
it will be. Yeah, that's going to be in the new DSM. We'll have an episode with Dr. Pewter again when that
we'll talk when that comes out. Compulsive squatting syndrome or compulsive squatting disorder, where the patient wants to add 5 pounds to his squat every 48 hours in perpetuity until the day he dies. Every other workout at the expense of everything. 25-minute rest breaks, no other lifts. Just got to get my squat. I know these people have hired you too, Trent, right?
I've never had anyone go that far. I've not had anyone go that far. I have definitely had some people that really, really struggle to move on from 3 sets of 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's and the fact that it's hey, if we do anything that is not those 4 lifts, it's just kind of what the hell are we doing with this program?
Yeah.
We're going off the rails. He put in some chin-ups.
And I see this obsession manifest the most with the squat. That's where I see it the most.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. This is almost some of this sadistic sort of quality to the squat. It's first, for most of us, it's the squat is, for me, it is the most uncomfortable lift.
I fucking hate it.
In when I'm doing a heavy. Yeah, absolutely. Heavy deadlifts it's not that bad, even though I can grind in a heavy deadlift a lot longer than I can a heavy squat. Yeah. So, I don't know if it's some sort of sadism where they just, this well, give me the hardest one. I'm just going to keep going at it.
I don't find it incredibly hard to get these guys to go intermediate on press and bench press, but squat, they don't want to let that one go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Press and bench press, I have issues with. I want to add 5 pounds forever, you know?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
That's the more common issue up top. But lower body, they'll skip the deadlift, or they will just, they'll bitch that it's not going up, but whatever. My squat needs to go up. Like I run into this, not as much lately, but early on when I first started coaching, and I get these guys that read starting strength, saw me on the boards or whatever, they hire me, and they wanted that. Or people, not so much in person, I don't get that so much, but there's this fixation with they want to stay on that. They took Rip's words so literally, because one of Rip's quotes are, "You want to be a novice as long as you can." Okay, I get that, So like if you've never lifted before and you're skinny, gain the weight, you're going to get a little fluffy. I'm not going to lie. You're going to put on some body fat. If you have a problem with that, then, it might not be the right program, and that's fine. There's other things you can do. But, leverage the body fat, leverage the body mass, the total body mass, because you're getting muscle too, and get as strong as possible, because it's never going to be this fast again. I understand that. The problem is, when you're squatting, let's say in the upper 3s or lower 4s if you're a bigger guy, that's a lot of weight, and 3 times a week, okay, you're going to keep resetting. How much do you think you're going to put on? You think you're just going to get that first spark of linear progression that you got on month 1 after a year, And it's like, well, I lost sleep those few days. Maybe if I just sleep better, it'll go up more. Then they'll run another LP. They'll put 5 pounds on it maybe, and then they'll crash,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, dude, all that stuff matters. You need to sleep. You need to eat better. Like, all those things matter. But you're talking about, 2% improvement at this point? And you're going to spend a bunch of months. You're going to spend several months working back up to where you got stuck to add 5 pounds. When,
that's the thing that I see more commonly is guys that run themselves into an absolute brick wall, and then they get hurt, or they just get so burnt out they end up stripping a bunch of weight off the bar, they because they're just so burnt out.
Well, too much stress. That is too much stress. That's
too
what
much
we're
stress.
About.
But then what I see more often is like these guys will tell me about this, and they'll be like, so I'll be like, okay, so what did you do after that? And they're like, well, and then eventually, like usually it's some sort of like, well, I laid off for a while, and then I put 225 on the bar, and I started LPing again.
Yeah.
That's the more common story that I'll see.
Yeah. If you're squatting double your body weight for 3 sets of 5 on an LP, and you start bottoming out, and sure, you had a few days of bad sleep, and maybe you underate one day, if you reset that, I don't know that you're going to put a whole lot on,
No. And you might more likely you might reset, and if we're talking about reset, in the starting strength, I don't know if this is in the blue book, but it is common when we say reset to pull the weight back about 10% and then try to drive it back up again.
Yeah,
it's sort of this move that we do for novices that usually when they're getting to the point where they're starting to miss lifts, there's some technique breakdown that creeps in, and and also maybe it's just some mental stuff where it's just mentally taxing to tackle heavier and heavier weights every time. So that little reset can sometimes help, because we take the weight back to something that's manageable. We can clean up any little technique issues, and also mentally, when they get back to that spot where they were before, where they might have struggled, they're sort of a little bit more ready for it. But I bet with these guys that are going just absolute bonkers ham on the squat, they reset and they don't get back to where they were.
No, they don't,
because they're overtrained, and they probably slept like shit because of their overtrained.
Yeah, and that is the prime example of too much stress. And I will always see it where the deadlift suffers real bad from this. And I get on people all the time. Their deadlift's not going anywhere, and their squat goes up. And then it gets to a point where their squat keeps getting stuck in the same place, and their deadlift is going nowhere. And the only way around that is to pull back some fatigue and move on to the next phase, right? So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You're squatting 3 times a week. You're adding 15 pounds a week to your squat. It's great. Enjoy it. That won't happen again. All right. So now your back's getting bonked out, but you don't just watch the squat. This is where I kind of diverge a little bit, not much. when your deadlift doesn't come off the floor and you're still squatting 3 times a week and making progress, your deadlift's not coming off the floor because the squat's wearing it out. So first thing I do is I drop the middle day altogether. I used to do a light squat in the middle. That's what's in the book. And I still do that, depending on the loads. Some people get the absolute load pretty high, so I just skip that step for those people.
Right.
But, for most of my novices, I do 80% in the middle. So I'll do that. I'll be like, okay, light squat in the middle. And then the deadlift tends to move again. And then I see that suffer. And then I'm like, all right, well, he could probably still make these jumps on the squat, but how about I just drop the middle day altogether, put the deadlift in between the 2 heavy squats, and just have him deadlift once a week on Wednesday,
Right.
And now his deadlift's going up every week, his squat's going up twice a week. Well, then later on, you start to see problems again. Then, okay, now you're an intermediate. Light squat on Monday, or heavy squat on Monday, light squat on Wednesday, or on Friday, sorry.
Yeah.
And you could do that. You could squat twice a week and be fine. Deadlifting twice a week, you could do that as well as an early intermediate. I don't think it's as necessary. It's not as technical as the squat. So I find that the once a week, just packing it all into one day seems to work well. The squat, I find, because of the level of skill required, the second day tends to be helpful,
Yeah.
And you get a stretch reflex on it. It starts with an eccentric lowering phase, followed by a stretch reflex versus a deadlift. You're having to overcome the inertia of the bar on the floor, which is real taxing on your back,
Yes.
So that's kind of how I've approached it lately. But as you can see, I just extend the recovery time, right? So the recovery time was 48 hours. Then it was, 96 hours. Now it's a full week, right, between heavy squat attempts. That means the heaviest squat you could do for a set of 5. You're going to do it Monday, then next Monday, then next Monday. Then eventually that stops working, right? So then I've done a few things. I'll just take the second day out. Now you're squatting once a week, right? And then it keeps going, right? Because the intensity is high. As intensity gets higher, you don't have to do these things as frequently. It's the reason, I think, for frequency in these real big lifts is practice, for early intermediates.
I was about to say, right. That is important.
Yeah, the reason I'm able to get away with it is because I've done the movement thousands of times at this point. So I squat once a week. I'm an advanced lifter. I don't need to squat more than once a week. So I either drop the second day altogether, or I'd make it a light week instead of a light day. So I have a light day and a slightly heavier day, right? But it's still, heavier than the light day, but not an RM, right?
Right.
So I have 2 days where one's like, modest and one's light. And then the next week we'll go for a 5 RM, right? And then I'll alternate, heavy week, light week, heavy week, light week, heavy week, light week. And I'll kind of ramp up, right?
Yeah.
Then that gets stuck, right? Then you go heavy, light, medium, heavy week, light week, medium week, right? So, if you kind of see the patterns here, with all these different programming styles and nomenclature and forms of periodization, there's really only one type if you think about it. If you're adding weight every time and the exercise is the same, it's a purely linear program. But guess what? If you're adding weight weekly, that's also linear, right? And if you're alternating the intensities, you're undulating it. That's your DUP, daily undulated periodization. I haven't seen that word very much lately, but it was a hot buzzword 8 years ago.
Right.
But if you're, doing daily undulated periodization, where let's say you do a heavy day, a light day, a medium day, right? So each day is a different intensity, but then you're adding weight to those 3 days the following week, so it's linear and it's undulated, right? And let's say you're doing a squat, a front squat, and a box squat, right? For your heavy, your light, your front squat, your medium, your box squat, right? Well, now you've used a form of the conjugate method, right? Because you've alternated the exercises, right? And you've added weekly, so it's linear. So they're all there, right? There's only really one type of periodization when you really get down and look at it, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I always approach it. And then as the stress gets greater, the recovery time gets longer. So then you've still got to think, when am I going to try that 5-rep PR? Am I going to try it next week? No, last time I did that, it went from 5 to 2, Well, I'll try it in 2 weeks, and then you make it, right? And that works for a while. Then later, that doesn't work. Typically I'll just go to the next rep range and run up a single and max out and then get some new data. But let's assume that, new training cycle, you've learned from the last training cycle that every 2 weeks is no longer working. Now you're going to go up every 3, right? Heavy, light, medium. Then from there, you go up every 4, etc. Because what's happening is as you are getting stronger and lifting heavier weights, that stress takes longer to recover from. So you're applying that stress. You're doing your 500 for 5 squat. Whoever's out there that can do that, right? Let's just use an extreme example here. Most people will not get to that, in my experience, And, I get it if you're at a powerlifting gym where that's pretty routine. Most people in that gym might be doing that. But in the grand scheme of things, you people doing that, you're in a small percentage of people. Even,
absolutely.
Even you and I, Trent, we're in a small percentage of people when you look at the aggregate. So, anyways, but let's say you got somebody who's squatting 500 for 5. He's probably not going to do 505 next week or 2 weeks later,
No.
But he might, go 500 one week, and then the next 3 weeks might titrate, he might take it down the next week, go light, ramp back up, then a month from now he'll go 505, And this works pretty well, when all factors are consistent, right? However, all factors are really consistent. That's why it doesn't work this cleanly in practice.
I was about to say the real confounding variable. So the one thing that you can observe, and I think you're about to say this, is that when you're talking about the big lifts and the barbell, the stress is very knowable in this situation. It's very, very controllable because we're using, especially if you're lifting at home, right? Or you're lifting in your own gym, you're using standardized bars, plates, standard rack format. The conditions under which you perform the lifts are pretty much always the same, and the load is changing by very controllable increments. So the stress part of the equation is very easy to figure out when we're just talking about the strength work in the program.
Yeah,
but the clear variable here is the recovery.
Yeah, exactly, and that brings me to my next point. You have buckets, right? I always say we have buckets. You have a bucket for stress, right? A stress bucket, and you have. Let's take your super strong guy. We wish we all were. You can imagine the person's really fucking tired afterwards. I mean, if I said 135 for 5, I know somebody listening is having trouble with that right now, but you're not going too much longer. Yeah. And if you keep having trouble with that, please call one of us. I'll cut you a deal. I mean, 135 for 5, if you're stuck on that and you're, a man under 35, and no, not even that, a man under 60.
Yeah.
Call one of us. We'll help you out. But it just, it doesn't really hit the point like 400, 500 for 5, right? Just imagine all that weight on your back and you did it 5 times. You're going to be pretty fucked afterwards, right?
Yeah.
It's safe to say I've never done it. I probably never will do it. I think I'll squat 500 for a single, but I don't think I'm squatting that for 5 in my lifetime. But I've squatted 410 for 5, and I know what that felt like, and I can't imagine another 90 pounds on that, right? And, you got to imagine this guy's really fucking tired. So he's going to need some time to add to that. But then guess what? His wife wakes him up screaming in the middle of the night about some random shit, and then they get into a fight for a week, and the guy can't sleep well, right? And then his neighbor starts bitching at him because he can hear it. And then his boss is an asshole too because his work's not getting done on time. And then he skips a few meals, right?
Yeah.
And then his tire blows out, and he's pissed off about that. He's got to tow the truck to the mechanic, and then he finds out he doesn't have rental coverage and has to pay for it. So these are all common problems, right? I've ran into some of them. I don't have a wife right now. If she's woken me up, my girlfriend's woken me up in the middle of the night screaming over a nightmare.
I was about to say, that's an awful specific example there.
Yeah, well, she's woke me up having nightmares, and I'm like, hey, I'm right here, that's not actually happening, but, you could take that a step further and it could turn into a real fucking problem. I didn't fuck up my training over that, but I'm like, just thinking about a collection of things that have happened to me.
Yeah, sure.
Not all of them, some of them are things people told me. Anyhow, but let's say, you're just having problems. Having lots of personal problems all at once, right? Murphy's Law is kicking in. And then that month has passed and you've gotten through the lighter workouts. And then that last one before the PR day, you're like, shit, man, why was that so hard? I should have fucking worked out better than that. Well, let's see. Next week I'll go for the PR. Then you go down and you only get one. Well, is it because your programming was fucked up, or is it because you lost sleep, were pissed off all the time, your blood pressure's high, and you're stressed out? Like those things start to matter. In contrast, when it's 135 for 5 and you're a novice, so long as you're eating enough, you could probably overcome all that and do 140, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the further along you get on this adaptation curve, the more these other stressors that go in the stress bucket start to compete with the stress of lifting the weight. Remember, that is just one form of stress, but your body doesn't know. I mean, it knows the difference from some standpoint. But in terms of like your body's systems to regulate all this shit, it's going to react to stress, whatever stress you put on it, right? And we're not just talking about we're not talking about your joints, muscles, and connective tissues. That's very specific, but your body's response to stress is going to kick in, whether it's physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress, etc. And if you start piling these up, the reason I laid out like 10 specific things there is because when you pile all these things up and you're lifting weights, you're going to adapt. You're going to lose your ability to adapt to that strength stressor because all these other stressors need to be recovered from as well.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I've run into that quite a bit, the last few months. We went through a couple of months where our son did not sleep very well. He went through a normal sleep regression. And so, our schedule that we had sort of adapted to over the previous couple months had, got flipped on its head. And then after that, he started teething. And then after that, he got a cold, so.
Yeah. And then you got fucking sandbags under your eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, that's the thing is that I had not appreciated as much before is like, obviously, yeah, my sleep is going to impact your training quite a bit if you're not getting enough, but it's more than that. A lot of times, in a way, I have adapted to sleeping a little bit less on average than I did before we had a kid. Now, if I get 4 hours of sleep, obviously that's going to have an acute effect on my ability to lift. But if my average goes down, I've actually kind of adapted to that somewhat since it's been several months. But what has impacted my training the most is my desire to train with super heavy weights. And I think it's truly a mental thing. When there's a lot of stuff going on in life, and it's not just the sleep situation, it's just other personal things, other family things get stacked on top of that. All of a sudden, my desire to go in the gym and strap on the heaviest weight I've done in a while or ever, it's not there. I want to train still. I enjoy training and going into the gym, but I just cannot kick myself mentally into gear to prepare to lift that weight. And that's the problem when you're trying to squat a PR set of 5, or even just something that's, pretty heavy set of 5. You have to have a level of mental commitment to execute the lift. And I found myself missing lifts because of commitment, and I'm not so sure that that's entirely all connective tissue, physiological stress that I'm dealing with, right? I think some of that is mental, and that's an aspect of this recovery game I had not really thought a whole lot about in the past.
Yeah. And basically what we're trying to say is all stress that you impose on yourself has to be recovered from.
Right.
Rip talks about that. And what you're describing is a constant state of stress. It's hard to progress with that.
Right.
I don't have a constant state of stress like that, but there are periods where I do, short periods. And when that has happened, my training goes to shit. Like, I started traveling. I was doing my PhD and traveling and trying to graduate and doing all this stuff at the same time. I didn't have a very good stretch of training there. When I opened the gym, I actually mitigated some of that stress by training less. I was just going twice a week, and then I accidentally got stronger. But I think the other thing that was going on there was I was overtrained on intensity leading up to that. So as a result, I was adding more stress here, but pulling stress here, and it ended up working out. I pulled back the tonnage in the program I was doing, but then I'd added more psychological stress. What's the word? Yeah, probably psychological life stress, I guess. Yeah,
adding a business, having to run this extra business.
Yeah, exactly. So, it kind of was, cancel each other out, and I ended up getting a little bit stronger there. But the point is, you have to acknowledge that stuff is real. And the most interesting example was a client that I trained recently. He may or may not be listening. I'm still training him now. But he came to me, and he was as stressed as can be. And, he's one of these guys that lost a ton of body weight and was lifting, but probably overtraining on volume. Not probably, he was. He was overtraining on volume. He didn't know how to program himself, regulate his lifts, and he's diabetic, and he wears a pump. So he has all this glucose data. So the first week, I took him down from where he was, and then he was still like stiff joints, achy joints, stressed out, like, anxiety around training, and just beat up, So I'm like, okay, dude, chill out. We'll, pull out a couple sets of deadlifts, pull out a squat, and just kept dialing down, basically mainly the squat and the deadlift. The upper body stuff was fine, but I knew where the stress was coming from. And we got him to a point where then he was moving along, right? And the interesting thing about it, I bring this guy up because he is a data guy. He was keeping so many records with his insulin usage, his glucose values, and how those were moving around when he was doing things in the weight room, right?
Yeah.
The other thing, too, was his body weight. We always hear about this stuff, hormones and fat gain and body weight. I got to see this kind of play out because the guy kept so much damn data. But, he had this fear of food because he had lost so much weight, and then he couldn't lose any more. He hit a wall because he was over-dieting, over-exercising, right?
Yeah.
So we dialed the training down, moved the calories up, kept his weight right around where he was at, which isn't where he wanted to be ideally, but he understood. He's a very smart man, so he understood logically, I have to stay here because I'm out of my mind right now. I'm beat up, and I can't eat fewer calories than this. This is what I'm doing right now is not sustainable. I know that what the answer is, I just don't like it, So, I major kudos to him for overcoming his brain and his emotions at that point in time because everything was very high strung at that point, right?
Yeah.
And then we just got to a point where he was just chilling out more, and he was finding that, he didn't have to use as much insulin. And then we were starting to see correlations between when we'd really hammer the stress in the weight room, we'd see those blood sugar spikes. He'd have to use more insulin. And then when we'd pull it back, it would kind of normalize back down. And this went all the way up till when we maxed him out. And it was interesting. Yeah, when he maxed out, it went up, then it kind of went back down. So, everything they say about that, we read about this. Reading about it's one thing, kind of watching it play out's another. And when we're in the hospital and we get stressed people from burns and other things, as dietitians, we have to work with burn victims.
Yeah.
And when the body's in a state of stress from that, glucose shoots through the roof. You start releasing a lot of blood sugar, and your body can't pump out enough insulin to bring it down. So I was starting to see that kind of play out because this person, obviously, he's diabetic, so he can't regulate his blood sugar without drugs. When the training stress was very high, he was just having to use a lot of insulin. His sugar was real high, and then when we just pulled back, so yes, he was doing less exercise, people. He started seeing more stable responses there. So that really, it's not that I ever doubted this stuff. I just never saw it like that.
Yeah, sure.
And I was like, yeah, all that stuff they're saying about stress, it's very real, and I'm seeing some objective data here. It's very real. If you're really stressed out, that's going to affect your ability to, hold your body weight and your body composition, your ability to train, your ability to recover. And that was the other thing too. When he had those higher blood sugar levels, his weight would swing up 3 pounds, and he just 3 or 4 pounds. And he in the beginning, when he was at his highest point of stress, that like bothered him. And later he's like, nope, I know why this is. I need more insulin resistant right now. I'm having to use more insulin. My blood sugar's up, so my weight's going up, and then it's probably going to go down in a few days. Then he got really good at predicting it. Guy's super smart. I enjoy working with him. So at the end, he just kind of figured out what his individual stress recovery adaptation cycle was, in a nutshell. And, now I'm mostly working on his technique. He wants to run an LP, and he's like, I'm not going to go to the late LP because I know, what'll happen there.
Right. Yeah.
But I want to see what I got here, So I'm like, all right, we'll do that. It was pretty cool. So, yeah, in a nutshell, when your body is stressed, it will be harder to lose weight. It will be harder to train. It will be harder to set PRs. And if it's in a constant state of it, you have to recover from that too. And, and your body will just put the strength adaptations on the back burner so that you could deal with the other stress that you're piling on. So the more stressors you have in that bucket, the harder it's going to be to progress, And
Yeah,
you have to understand that.
Exactly. And I think that psychological stress too, as you were talking about that example, it's a cool example, by the way. One of the things about psychological stress is that it alters behavior, right? People tend to get erratic with their day-to-day habits when the stress gets too high. You start doing things you don't normally do. You start snacking on foods that you may not normally eat. You start, picking up weird habits. You start chain smoking outside.
Oh yeah.
No, but everybody has these, right? There's sort of little coping mechanisms that we have that just to sort of keep us going, day to day, hour by hour, minute by minute kind of thing. Yeah. And those daily habits, as we talk about, are really powerful when it comes to like what direction is taking your health and fitness. It's the daily habits that help you lose weight or gain weight, right? Well, by the same token, it's those daily habits that can pop out under chronic psychological stress that end up affecting the sort of, what we think of as the main drivers of recovery and training, which is your food and sleep. And so they're kind of, it's kind of a double whammy, right? Because psychological stress, as you just laid out, has an actual physical impact in the body, but it's also going to alter your habits, which will also have an effect on the body, right? It's hard to, that's one of the hardest things I have to deal with older clients, because I have a lot of folks that I coach that are in their 40s and, or maybe even early 50s. And a lot of them tend to be, life is very full for them. They're at peak career, stress is high in their jobs. Their families are they have their full families. The kids are older and have lots of activities, and there's just a lot going on. And it's hard sometimes to just, I'll see it because I'm looking at this from an objective standpoint from a distance, but it's hard for them to help people realize sometimes like, hey man, you're just burning the candle at both ends, and we've got to take a step back in the training if you want to get further ahead in the future. Because if we go at the same pace we're doing now, we're just going to run you into the ground, and then then we got a real problem. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a great example. I like that you've laid that out. So what I'm kind of picking up from this conversation here is that if you want to be a serious lifter and you want to do this for a long period of time, you want to lift for years and not just do this for a couple years. You have to understand the stress recovery adaptation cycle, and you're going to have to be able to come up with your individual SRA cycle, and apply that to your training. Because yes, you can hire a coach, and coaches can help you to learn that and learn some ways to navigate stretching out your stress recovery cycle as you run into roadblocks. But as coaches, we can't understand all of the unique aspects of the stress that you encounter in your life outside the gym, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have to develop your own intuition around that. And so you have to learn how the stress recovery adaptation cycle works, and then what you would do with the programming. And I think this goes back to like our RPE discussion from the last episode, right? The advanced lifters, whether you use RPE or not, at some point you're going to have to introduce some auto regulation, and you're going to have to, as a coach, you have to give some leeway to lifters to make some training decisions on their own, right? Like whether it's, perform this within a range of weights, or, I want you to do this lift for a max effort single, or, however you define it, there's got to be some sort of auto regulation. And that's just a recognition of this fact that we've been talking about, which is they're going to have very individual, unique stressors that we can't fully understand as coaches.
Right.
And we have to account for that.
100%. And, it's something that you got to be honest with yourself about ultimately. And, a lot of people aren't. They want to think it's a programming problem, it's a diet problem. They'll program hop, they'll coach hop, they'll try this diet, that diet. And at the end of the day, all these stressors are very real. They're very real. And you have to take them seriously, And when I go in sometimes and I didn't sleep enough, and then I'm shy a few reps on my squat. I go in managing expectations, but then I try to do as much as I can. I always go for it.
Right. Yep.
Then when it doesn't go well, I'm like, well, I slept 4 hours yesterday, or 5 hours.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later, I'll get 3 more reps, and I've just gotten used to that. And just the fact that I go in there with that and just let it roll off my shoulders, I think that has made it a lot easier.
Yes.
So we've talked about too much stress and what that looks like. And too much stress could be in the form of trying to squat 3 times a week forever, or in the form of you had some shit happen to you outside of the gym. You had a bad day at work, having problems at home, your car broke down, all these things, you're sick. We didn't even mention illness, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like all these things, so that's how too much stress typically manifests. Then, not enough recovery. The most classic case, you're not eating enough, you're not sleeping enough, or you're not giving yourself enough time between those limited attempts, which is, let's go back to, what we were talking about earlier with upper body. That's the problem I was running into that I said I'd come back to.
Yeah.
I had compulsive bench syndrome, which I think that's probably more popular broadly than compulsive squat syndrome.
Right, right.
Most people bench, not a lot of people squat, relatively speaking. I did an obviously linear progression years ago. Then, I just got in this habit of, okay, I'm going to start a program. I'm going to bench, whatever weight. Then I'm going to add 5 pounds, and I'm going to keep doing that every week. Then I'll, maybe 2.5 pounds, And then eventually I'd miss a rep. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to max out. And then, with the exception of this little period of time in 2020 where I just got fat and the bench went up from better leverage, I really haven't went up my bench. Well, recently I'd started this arm program. There's, doing 10s on bench, and I'm doing dumbbell bench and incline and a lot of isolation stuff for triceps. And, we can talk about that more specifically in a different episode, but basically doing a lot of volume. And I ran this similar program. I'm on my 3rd time now. First time I ran it, everything went up pretty fast, as you would expect, because I haven't done these movements. And I'm like, yeah, like novice effect, right?
Right. Yep.
Second time I ran it, my back work kept going up. So all my rows and stuff kept going up. My arm work kept going up, no problem, like the biceps and triceps, because I just don't train this stuff, But then the bench just fell off a cliff. I got proximal biceps tendonitis. So, for, you're non-anatomical people out there, that's where you get tendonitis right where the shoulder connects to the pec. That's your bicep, where your bicep connects to your shoulder.
Yeah, right on that coracoid process.
Yeah, like right there. Right there in the corner. So I got that. So I got biceps tendonitis up there. And then I just could not progress my freaking bench. My incline a little bit kept going up, but my flat dumbbell bench, and then later on when I put the barbell back in, they just were not moving. And I ran into this problem where, I dumbbell benched 90s. I did 10 reps, barely got it. Then it fell off a cliff for the second and third set. This happened the first time I ran the second time. So that's where I finished the first program. I finished at 90 for 10, right? And I didn't get 3 sets with it. Then the second run at it, I'm like, well, I got stronger from the first time, so I'm going to start there, which I was able to do with other exercises that were newer to me and progress from there, right? Well, with that one, I just did 90 the entire program because I can only get 1 set of 9 or 10, and maybe 10 one week, 9 1 week. And after that, I finished. I was going to run another variation of the program the third time, but this time I'm like, I have to change something because I got tendonitis and it's not going up. I'm getting stuck in the same place. So not enough stress or too much stress, right? Or not enough recovery or too much stress. So I'm like, okay, with the squat and the deadlift, I've basically gotten to every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on where the intensity is.
Right.
With the higher intensity sets being once a month, right? If I'm trying to hit a 5-rep PR or a 3-rep PR, right? So I'm like, I've never done this with bench. I just try to go up weekly forever and ever and ever, So I guess I'm better than the 3-time-a-week squat situation, but I've always just wanted to add weight every week. So I'm like, all right, let's just do exactly what I did for the squat and the deadlift, except with more volume because it's upper body, right? So you can recover a little bit faster, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, I'm going to do 90% one week and then 100% the next week. So, when I got to the dumbbells, I did, I think, 80 81, I think. Or no, I started with 92 and a half. It was my intensity. So the first week, I didn't even go heavy because I think the last week of the first phase was heavy. So I'd already been alternating, and I didn't do any dumbbell flat bench. I did. Oh no, I did do it. And I was doing it every other week. Sorry, I was doing it after the incline, so the weight was lower because I was going into it tired. So then I flipped that for the second phase, where I'm flat benching with the dumbbells first and then incline second. So I'm fresh now, right? So I can do more weight. So that first week I did like 82 pounds, I think, for 3 sets of 10, and I got them all. And I was tired because the week before was heavy, and then I kept my tricep work heavier that week. So heavy triceps, light bench. Following week, loaded up 92 and a half, got 3 sets of 10. So remember, the previous phase, I did 90 for 1 set of 10 and could not get more than 8 or 9 for the subsequent sets, right?
Yeah, right.
But then the first time I put 92 and a half on, I got 3 sets of 10, all 3, no problem. I wouldn't say no problem. The last rep was a bit of a grinder on the second and third set. The first set, I could have done 11 or 12.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So it worked, So then that week, I'm like, okay, well, I'll dial the tricep work down this week since the bench work is heavy. And then the following week, which is this week, so I'm on week 3 of this, I did 83 or 84 for my bench. And then I made the tricep work all heavy.
Yeah.
So then next week, I'll dial down the tricep work, and I'll ramp up the bench work, and I'll go for 95, right? And now my bench is finally moving. But see what I mean? On the bicep stuff, same thing. I did 6 months straight, basically weekly linear progression on all sorts of curls,
Yeah, right.
And I never had to deload when starting a new cycle. And then when I redid the program the second time, I started where I ended and added to that. Well, this third time around, remember, now I'm getting close to 9 months, and typically novices don't last 9 months. When we're talking about just the, with the big barbell lifts, well, it's the same kind of thing with, any lift. Now, I finished up the second run at this. So at the 6-month phase, I started getting some golfer's elbow on my right. And then I kind of ignored it. And part of it was technique. Like I think I was, you see these guys not lock out. I used to make fun of them, these bodybuilders that don't lock out on their curls. There's a reason for that. When you extend your elbow completely, like do a tricep extension at the bottom of a curl, your tendon is going to bear a lot of that load, and you will feel it when it's heavy. And that's what. Yeah. So I was doing this on a preacher curl, and I was locking out my elbow, and then eventually the weight got heavy enough, and I started getting tendonitis. Then the other side started probably compensating. I got on the other side. So I just looked at it the same way. I'm like, okay, well, I got to curl light 1 week. I'm going to curl heavy 1 week. And that's what I've been doing. And it's been healing slow because I'm still doing stuff. So it, tends to be slower when you keep training. And I'm training through it, But it's going away. It should be gone soon, and I'm not worried about it. But once I switched to that split, the tendonitis started calming down, and the curling variant that I can still do, I can do a regular curl. I can't supinate because I think it was actually the brachioradialis tendon probably that was aggravated at first. Now it's mostly in the forearm, brachioradialis.
Yeah.
But I can curl with a supine grip just fine and push it to failure as long as it's 12 reps. If I'm doing less than 10, it will hurt, And it's getting better, but yeah, again, now my curls are more intermediate than before. So every other week, and then when that starts to be a problem, every 3 weeks. So, but the way I look at it now is I'm not pulling up templates online or trying to use all this overcomplicated strength and conditioning bullshit. Simply looking at it as, okay, probably need more recovery because the stress has now gotten greater than it used to be.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what we're trying to outline here is that, if you start looking at this systematically and diagnosing what's going on, you can learn a lot about programming just by following the way that you're responding. And you have to, and I think what's important too is just to kind of take where you're at. It sounds really obvious, but if when you're running into the issue, try to take a systematic, logical approach to it and diagnose what's going on and then apply the fix. Don't worry about what other people are doing or what you've seen in other programs, because again, remember, by definition, when you're doing this stuff, you are intermediate, or advanced. And one of the things that comes along with that is it becomes very individual. And programs can, in real life, in real practice, can be, very different from lifter to lifter. And it can be very different with the same lifter over a period of time, right? So, you kind of, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Sometimes I think my programming needs to look a certain way because that's what other people are doing. And I have to pinch myself sometimes and be like, oh, hey, dude, like just, what you need to do. You've already seen the problem and you know what the fix is. Just apply it, do it. And, but I know I've run into that. I'm sure some of you out there have run into that same problem. Okay, and the last thing I will say, I wanted to point out here that I thought was just kind of a helpful thing. So I think it was Dan Flanick on Andy Baker's show on the Baker Barbell podcast. I think he said this originally, and I forget which episode it was on. So sorry about that. But he said simply that he has started to think about stress in the stress recovery adaptation cycle as a dose, rather than tonnage or intensity or anything like that, right? He's like, yeah, I just think of it as a dose. And you develop a sense, an intuition of how much stress is in a dose in a workout over time, right? And again, this is going to be individual. For me, rack pulls may not tax me that much, but for you, a rack pull might constitute a very high dose of stress.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, for me it is, definitely.
Yeah. Interestingly, I tend to recover from those better than pulls from the floor.
Interesting.
But that's the thing, right? It can be very individual. So the point being is that when you become advanced and you're thinking about iterating your training and spreading out your recovery cycle, you can think of the stress not as much in terms of sets and reps, but simply as how much dose am I getting here? Yep. And it can work, I think, with a range of with a wide rep range, right? You can think of a set of 10 on the squat as being a heavy dose. A set of 5 can be a heavy dose, right? 3 sets of 10 on a dumbbell could be a heavy dose.
Oh yeah,
right. And so I found that more helpful when I'm thinking about planning the big picture of my program is think about, okay, I want a high dose of stress on this workout. And then the following week, I want a light dose. Okay, then I can start to think about my set and rep range that I want to use. Right. Okay, I've been working 5s for a long time and, I'm kind of in a reset kind of part of my cycle. Okay, let me think about doing 8s and 10s, but I still want a heavy dose here. Or a high dose, however you want to think about it. And so, I found that to be really helpful too, because the sets and reps are going to change for a number of reasons we've talked about in the past. Once you're no longer a novice, 5s can sometimes, 5s are still a very useful rep range for strength building, but sometimes you got to get away from them for a while to get things moving.
Yeah, 5s forever is a problem.
It is, right. 8s and 10s can be a great stimulus if you just haven't done them, either in a long time or never done them. But you can apply a high dose of stress, whether you're doing 10s, 8s, 5s, triples, singles, whatever, right?
Yeah. So, the big takeaway here is that when you are programming yourself, you want to consider, the stress, the mechanical stress you're applying through lifting, the amount of recovery you're allowing yourself between stressors, in terms of the lifting program. And then you want to think about the stress that is being applied to you. Sometimes you're not applying this actively. Sometimes you are, if you're in another sport. We didn't even talk about that, but you want to think about the stress that is being applied to you in life, as well as additional stress that you're applying to yourself. Let's say you're in another sport, we'll just throw that in there. I think we kind of get the general idea now, so we don't have to dive into that. It could be another episode. But you want to think about that, and then as well as the recovery outside of the weight room, not just the time between PR attempts, but, how much you're eating, how much you're sleeping, and those things, right? And keep that in the back of your mind when you're planning your program, when you're executing it. When things go wrong, don't narrow it down to, oh, I need a new diet, or I need this supplement, or I need a new program. It's not that simple, right? You have competing stressors always. To the extent of it can vary, but you always have competing stressors because lifting isn't the only thing that's stressing you out.
Yeah, right.
So that's what you want to think about. So yeah, those are my 2 cents on it. I think we really dug a lot deeper into this than we planned to, which I think is cool. It's a positive. Sometimes that happens, and I'm happy when it does. Hopefully the listeners are just as happy. And yeah, do you have anything else you want to add, Trent?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Let's sign off, man.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. The gym is at weights _and _plates.
All right, excellent. You can find me on Instagram at marmalade_cream. Or if you want to send me an email about training, programming, if you want some help with this stuff, I can do that. Email me jonesbarbellclub@gmail.com. All right, we'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.